Thank you, Esther, for hosting us today, and thank you, Sue, for the kind introduction. Can we turn off the sound in here, please? Thank you. For the past year and a half, my colleagues and I on the FOMC have been conducting the first ever public review of our monetary policy framework. Earlier today, we released a revised statement on longer-run goals
and yada yada half-truths galore. Hello on behalf of SDBullion.com, this is James Anderson. And before we start this week's market update, be sure to go below and smash the like button. Let's get this website's algorithm knowing that you enjoy our slicing through some of the nonsense that Fiat Federal Reserve Note Chairman Jerome Powell just laid on everyone who can still think critically in the year 2020 in late August. After we get through some of the Fed's faith-based talking points, we're going to have a major update too on COMEX gold and silver to close. Now, back to Chair Powell addressing the last time the Fiat Federal Reserve note got knocked out by an exponential gold spot price in late January 1980, now over 40 years ago.
40 years ago, the biggest problem our economy faced was high inflation. The great inflation demanded a clear focus on restoring the credibility of the FOMC's commitment to price stability. Chair Paul Volcker brought that focus to bear, and the Volcker disinflation, with the continuing stewardship of Alan Greenspan, led to the stabilization of inflation and inflation expectations in the 1990s at around 2%.
Okay, freeze right here. Some refusing is required. Around the time when former Federal Reserve Chairman Paul Volcker was jacking the fiat Fed funds rate to peaks of over 20% interest, we had very little in comparative U.S. national debt loads, nor close to our now well more than 100 trillion size unfunded liability piles we have only since fractionally saved for along the way. The Consumer Price Index, or CPI rate of official government inflation, has been consistently and increasingly more rigged to favor the government over average U.S. citizens since the year 1980. That's not a coincidence. For decades now, we've been compounding a roughly not reported 3 to 4% extra of consumer price inflation year after year. And somehow the debt pile still outgrows our fiat inflation riggings. This past week's Jackson Hole virtual speech is a clear and present warning that the rigged government versus real inflation figure gap is going to get much wider this decade, and maybe into the next, if this present dominant reserve currency system somehow survives that long. Interest rates are again at 5,000-year low levels, and they're going to likely stay that way for the next 5 years, even if the Fed has to monetize everything.
The monetary policies of the Volcker era laid the foundation for a long period of economic stability known as the Great Moderation.
There was certainly a great moderation or restraint of working class wage increases or real salary raises. They basically flatlined in value the last 40 years, all while the pesky rigged inflation rate was increasingly making them a consumer debt slave class. Oh, and usury laws, they got banned in the early 1980s. That's not a consumer credit card coincidence either.
This new era brought new challenges to the conduct of monetary policy. Before the Great Moderation, expansions typically ended in overheating and rising inflation. Since then, prior to the current pandemic-induced downturn, a series of historically long expansions had been more likely to end with episodes of financial instability, prompting essential efforts to substantially increase the strength and resilience of the financial system.
The global Fiat Federal Reserve financialization has essentially made financial and banking crises larger in size and scale every round they come along. This next one should be the largest of all time, dwarfing the 2008 GFC's size and scale. Up next, Jerome Powell is going to highlight the Fed Listens public relations campaign, where they pretend their ongoing fiat financialization policies have not hurt the poor working class or shrunk the American middle class in the last 4 decades of fiat financialization.
As we heard repeatedly in our Fed Listens events, the robust job market was delivering life-changing gains for many individuals, families, and communities, particularly at the lower end of the income spectrum. Before the pandemic, there was every reason to expect that these gains would continue. The persistent undershoot of inflation from our 2% longer-run objective is cause for concern. Many find it counterintuitive that the Fed would want to push inflation up. After all, low and stable inflation is essential for a well-functioning economy. And we are certainly mindful that higher prices for essential items, such as food, gasoline, and shelter, add to the burdens faced by many families, especially those struggling with less jobs and incomes. However, in seeking to achieve inflation that averages percent over time, we are not tying ourselves to a particular mathematical formula that defines the average. Thus, our approach could be viewed as a flexible form of average inflation targeting. As our statement indicates, we plan to undertake a thorough public review of our monetary policy strategy, tools, and communication practices roughly every 5 years. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Fiat Fed Chair Powell. Hey, quick question. Do you know one of the fastest ways to get inflation ripping higher? It's an exponential gold and then silver price, followed by a commodity value melt up later on this decade. So maybe by late August 2025, Chair Powell, you'll likely be on the multi-million-dollar speech circuit, and we'll be looking at massive inflation and structural changes in the global financial system, both possibly coinciding around that same time. Hey, if you missed our report from last week, stay tuned to the end of this video as we cover what central bank monetary changes are now afoot around the largest economies in the world. Let's move on to this week's price action in gold and silver markets. And let's key in on the exact time that Powell was making his Inflation Great Nation 2020 speech. And oh, look, both monetary metals shot straight up at the start of the speech, only to get slapped backwards straight down by the highest volume trades in both respective metals over the last 3 months of time. Yes, these are the gold and silver markets of the year 2020. As bullish as they are, there's still a bunch of trading that looks entirely suspicious. Early this past week, precious metals investigative sleuth Ronan Manley published a great Comex We Have a Problem finding. The article is titled LBMA Comex Collusion Intensifies as CME approves 267 LBMA gold and silver bar brands. 51 LBMA approved gold refineries have been added to the eligible brand list for the COMEX 100 GC 100 gold futures contract. These 51 additional refinery brands are listed directly under the existing refinery list with the subheading of added as 27th July 2020. There were 69 brands on this list prior to the 27th July, and now there's over 120 current brands on the GC gold list. 65 LBMA-approved silver refineries have been added to the eligible brand list for the COMEX SI 5,000-ounce silver futures contract. These 65 additional refinery brands are listed directly under the existing refiner list with the subheading as added of 27th July 2020. No word yet on how many of these LBMA-approved silver and gold refineries are going to turn into blood gold refinery scandals in the coming years. But it now looks like the COMEX is reaching far east for any bullion bars they can get to come back here to the Western world. Next week, we should have a massive stopped COMEX silver's contract number to report here. Stay tuned for the video we did late last week, on Cassius Trends Building with direct central bank digital currency issuance systems now being constructed in over 60 nations around the world. As we get ready for inflation to rage further this decade globally, we should also expect to see changes in fiat currency creation as the current dominant monetary regime of the fiat Federal Reserve note likely shifts dramatically into a more multipolar world. Until next week, take good care of yourselves and those that you love. If you enjoyed this content, be sure to give our video a thumbs up. To keep getting bullion-related news and industry insights, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Finally, hit that alert button so you know when we publish fresh content. Give us your thoughts in the comments below. Let us know what you think and which topics you want to hear more about.